what is autoimmune disease from your understanding, and are they all, I know not all autoimmune diseases are the same. Obviously, that's not the question, but can they all be linked back to similar causes? Yeah, and let's start there.
Yeah, so autoimmune disease, there's actually three things that have to be in place in order for autoimmune disease to manifest. And so you have to have all three. If you have one of the three, you can still live without autoimmune disease. If you have two to three, you can still live without autoimmune disease. But if you have three of the three, that autoimmune disease will manifest. So here's the three. So you have to have a genetic predisposition. So that means you have to have some genetic variants in your genetic code that allow you to have an autoimmune condition. Some people are lucky. Some people actually don't have any genetic variants. So no matter what they do, they won't get an autoimmune condition. Lucky people. I happen to have many genetic variants that predispose me to getting an autoimmune condition if the other two things are in place. The second thing is a leaky gut. So you have to have some permeability. We actually have our gut lining, our intestinal mucosal barrier. It's a barrier between us and the outside world. And so our bodies are very smart, and they selectively allow certain things through. And so your gut will allow nutrients and different things through, but it'll actually block different antigens, different proteins from getting into the system, because those can actually excite the immune system and cause inflammation, and the inflammation will cause the immune system to do what it does and attack these invaders. But sometimes there's a switch, and the genetics allow that switch to not be turned off. And when the switch in your immune system is not turned off, that fight continues. And when the fight continues, not only are you fighting that protein that is the invader, but you start fighting your own tissues as well. And so that's kind of what autoimmune disease is. It's a overreaction of your immune system. And it's not that your immune system is doing something wrong. It's actually doing what it's supposed to do, but it just doesn't have the off switch. It forgets to turn itself off. And so that's number two, is a leaky gut or intestinal permeability. And then number three is a trigger. And so a trigger can be anything like stress. It could be gluten. It could be a toxin in the environment. So there has to be some type of trigger. And for different people, different triggers will set off different autoimmune conditions. For me, gluten was a big trigger for me, and as was stress. And for many, many people, as I'm seeing in my practice, as women come to me, and autoimmune conditions are so very common nowadays, and they're more common than they ever were before. And some of those triggers are vaccines, some of the things in the vaccines, the toxins, the metals, stress. I mean, when we think about how much stress we have today compared to how much stress our grandmothers had, it is exponential. I'm all about women like having jobs and living equality, women's equality, but women are now working full-time careers. They're taking care of the kids, they're taking care of the house, they're also taking care of aging parents sometimes, finances, volunteering in the community. All of those things build up, and we're still only one person. So these stressors are exponential, and for men too, because when we used to have a society where we could live on one income, one person would work and that would be their job, and the other person, the household, would be their job, right? And so there is a division of responsibility. But now both parents are working, both parents are responsible for the house, and it causes this chaos and this inability to keep up, and that stress is a trigger. And then in addition, we have, GMOs in our food. Our food isn't as nutritionally dense as it used to be. So we have less vibrational frequency, less information in our food. And our food is actually nutrition, but it's also information for our genes, telling them which ones to turn on, which ones to turn off. And so if we're not getting the proper nutrition, or we're getting the wrong information, and genetically modified foods, they're different than they're supposed to be. When you think about a genetically modified food, a lot of times if you have an organic vegetable and you have a genetically modified vegetable, you'll notice the organic one will actually go bad. It will start to spoil and it'll rot. And the genetically modified one, that'll last a lot longer, which sounds great, right? That's like, wow, it's awesome, it lasts longer. But when we think about our cells. Our cells turn over. When you think about like our skin cells, you have dead skin cells that flake off. Our bone cells turn over. All of our body cells turn over. And then when the cells get older and not as functional, they're supposed to die and turn over. And when we have these genetically modified foods that are getting into our body, they're making it unable for our cells that are getting old not to die. And so it's going to cause cancer and autoimmune conditions and all these different conditions to happen. So that's one of the things. And then also all the toxins in our environment. Oh my goodness. Like we didn't have like 17 different shampoos, and we didn't have all these different personal care products and cleaning supplies and all these. Our grandmothers used to clean with like vinegar and baking soda, right? Now we have all these chemicals in our cleaning supplies, in our food, in our air, in our skincare, everything. And so unfortunately, it's harder to we actually have to physically make a conscious effort to avoid all the toxic stuff. Whereas like our grandmothers, they would just live their life and they wouldn't have all those toxic things in their life. So, so it's like the added stress, the physical stress, the mental, emotional stress, and then the biochemical stress are all things that are triggers for those autoimmune conditions to happen.
So I have a couple of questions for you. One, is that true for all autoimmune diseases, whether it's ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease or Hashimoto's or whatever? Those three things, predisposition to genes, leaky gut, and some kind of trigger, whether it's stress or some toxin. Is that true for all autoimmune diseases?
I do believe it's true for all autoimmune diseases. When I say leaky gut, it could also be leaky brain. The gut and the brain are connected when we're developing. They're actually one thing. So crossing the blood-brain barrier is the same as crossing the intestinal mucosal barrier. So it's all one. So with that in mind, yes, I do believe that all autoimmune diseases do require those three things to be in place. And if you do have an autoimmune condition, if you deal with one of those things, so for instance, you can't change your genetic propensity, no matter how hard you try. We currently do not have the technology available to all of us. There is technology that's in the works in labs to actually change your genetic code. So that one we're going to leave to the side. But you can reduce triggers. You can, remove stress, remove sensitive foods that you're sensitive to, remove toxins. So that's one thing you can work on. You can't live in a bubble. So I'm not saying remove everything, but removing the things that are causing issues for you. And then also, healing and sealing the gut, making sure that you're not taking in things that are going to affect the blood-brain barrier. When I say that, one thing that comes to mind almost automatically is vaccines, because we're seeing, since children have been quadrupled the amount of vaccines that they're given at a very young age, autoimmune disease is exponentially grown. And the reason for that is because the vaccines have these toxic metals in them, and then they also have materials that help the metals pass into the blood-brain barrier, and this causes that trigger reaction, which can cause the autoimmunity. And it's the trigger and the move into the permeability into the gut-brain barrier as well. So those two things are together. And so I'm not trying to be like anti-vaccine, but I'm anti-vaccine the way the vaccines are actually made today.